The Appalachian Mountains are old. They're older than the trees that cover them. They're older than the rivers that carve through their valleys. These mountains stretch across the eastern part of America like a long, sleeping giant. In West Virginia, the mountains are especially rugged and deep. The hollows, which are small valleys nestled between the steep hills, are places of quiet and shadow. People have lived in these hollows for generations. They know the sounds of the forest. They know the secrets the wind whispers through the tall oak and hickory trees. The mountains hold many stories. Some are happy, but, many are not. They are tales of hardship, mystery, and things that cannot be easily explained. The folks who live in these mountains are often as quiet and reserved as the landscape around them. They keep to themselves. They trust their neighbors but are wary of outsiders who do not understand their ways. In these isolated communities, stories are passed down not in books, but by the fireside on cold winter nights. These tales become a part of the land itself. They are warnings. They are memories. They speak of strange lights seen in the forest, of sounds that have no source, and of places that are best left undisturbed. The mountains have a way of holding on to these mysteries, burying them deep under layers of rock and time, where they wait patiently. In 1952, the world outside was changing fast. There were new cars, new music, and new ideas spreading across the country. But in the deep hollows of West Virginia, time moved much slower. Life was tied to the seasons. It was about planting in the spring, harvesting in the fall, and surviving the winter. Folks around here relied on old knowledge, on the wisdom of their grandparents, and on a deep respect for the powerful, untamed nature that surrounded their small homes. They understood that the mountains were not just rock and dirt. They were alive, and they had a memory that was long and unforgiving, a memory that stretched back into the darkness of the past. This was a land of superstitions and deep-seated beliefs. People knew which plants could heal and which could harm. They knew the signs that foretold a harsh winter or a coming storm. They also knew about the other signs, the ones that hinted at something darker. A bird flying into a house was a bad omen. An owl hooting during the day meant trouble was near. These beliefs were not just stories. They were rules for survival in a place where the line between the natural world and the supernatural was often blurred. The mountains demanded respect, and those who forgot that lesson often paid a heavy price for their carelessness. One of the most secluded places in these mountains was a hollow known as Whitmer's Gap. It was a narrow crease in the earth, walled in by steep, tree-covered ridges that blocked out the morning sun. The air in the gap always seemed a little cooler, a little heavier. A small creek, called Blackwater Run, trickled over smooth stones at the bottom of the hollow. It was a place of deep shadows and unsettling quiet. Even the birds seemed to sing less often here. The hollow got its name from the Whitmer family, who were the first to try and settle the land. They built a small cabin near the creek, cleared a patch of ground for a garden, and tried to make a life there. But the Whitmers did not last long. One autumn, many, many years ago, they simply vanished. The story goes that a neighbor from the next hollow over went to visit them. He found the cabin empty. The door was wide open, swinging gently in the breeze. A half-eaten meal was still on the table. The family's tools were leaning against the outside wall, as if they had just been set down. But the Whitmers were gone. All of them. The father, the mother, and their 3 small children. No one ever saw them again. There were no tracks, no signs of a struggle. It was as if the hollow itself had swallowed them whole. After the Whitmers disappeared, people started calling the place Whitmer's Gap. It was a name spoken with a certain unease. For a long time, no one dared to live there. Hunters would sometimes pass through, but they never stayed after dark. They spoke of a strange feeling in the air, a sense of being watched by unseen eyes. They told stories of hearing faint whispers on the wind that sounded like their own names being called from the trees. Some said they saw strange, fleeting shapes moving in the shadows at the edge of their vision, only to find nothing there when they turned to look. Over the years, a few brave or desperate families tried to settle in Whitmer's Gap. None of them stayed for more than a year or two. They would leave suddenly, packing up their belongings in a hurry and never speaking much about why they left. They would only say that the hollow was not a good place. They said the ground was sour, that their crops wouldn't grow right, and that their animals were always nervous and sick. They spoke of nightmares that plagued their sleep, and a deep, gnawing loneliness that seeped into their bones. The hollow, it seemed, did not want people living in it. In the early spring of 1952, a man named Morai Hon arrived in the area. He was not from the mountains. He was a surveyor, hired by a timber company from out of state. His job was to map the land, to measure the boundaries of different properties so the company would know which trees they could cut down. Morai was a practical man. He was young and confident. He believed in numbers, maps, and the solid logic of his trade. He had heard the local stories about Whitmer's Gap, but he dismissed them as simple folklore, the superstitions of uneducated mountain folk. He had a job to do, and a spooky story was not going to stop him. Morai set up his camp near the entrance to the hollow. He planned to spend several weeks working his way through the gap, marking lines and taking measurements. For the first few days, his work went smoothly. The weather was clear, and the quiet of the forest was peaceful. He found the old stone markers that separated one piece of land from another and recorded their positions in his notebook. He felt none of the unease the locals had warned him about. The hollow was just a hollow. The trees were just trees, and his job was just a job. He thought the mountain people were just afraid of the unknown. Then, one night, a powerful storm rolled in. The rain came down in sheets, turning the ground to mud. Thunder echoed off the ridges like cannon fire, and lightning lit up the dark hollow in stark, flashing images. Morai huddled in his tent, listening to the fury of the storm. Sometime before dawn, he was awakened by a tremendous roar. It was a sound deeper and more powerful than thunder. The ground beneath him trembled. He knew immediately what it was: a landslide. The heavy rains had loosened the soil and rock on one of the steep hillsides, and a massive section of the ridge had given way. The next morning, Morai went to inspect the damage. He found that a huge scar had been torn into the side of the mountain, not far from his camp. Tons of earth, rock, and uprooted trees had slid down into the hollow, blocking a part of the creek and creating a dam of debris. It was a display of nature's raw power. As he was carefully picking his way across the unstable ground, looking at the fresh wound in the earth, he saw something that made him stop. It was a dark opening at the base of the rock face, where the landslide had ripped away the soil and vegetation. It was a hole, a cave. It was a place that had been hidden from sight for a very long time. The opening was not large. It was a jagged, dark slit in the gray rock, partially obscured by fallen roots and dirt. It looked like a mouth half open in a silent scream. A cool, damp air flowed out of it, carrying a strange, earthy smell that was different from the scent of the wet forest. It smelled of deep, old places that had never seen the sun. Morai was a man driven by curiosity. A hidden cave was not something you found every day. He felt a pull to see what was inside. He went back to his camp, grabbed his brightest flashlight and a length of rope, and returned to the dark opening in the hillside. He told himself it was just a cave, a simple geological formation. He squeezed through the narrow entrance, scraping his coat on the sharp edges of the rock. The passage quickly opened up into a larger chamber. He stood up and swept the beam of his flashlight around. The air inside was cold and completely still. The silence was absolute, a heavy blanket that seemed to press in on him from all sides. The walls of the chamber were not like those of a normal cave. They were strangely smooth, almost polished, and they seemed to ripple in the light of his flashlight. They were a dark, wet black, and they felt slick and faintly warm to the touch, which was odd given the cold air. As he moved deeper into the cave, he noticed stranger things. The floor was not rough and uneven with fallen rocks. Instead, it was soft, almost spongy, like packed earth or moss. It gave slightly under his boots with each step, and there were patterns on the walls. At first, he thought they were just natural formations in the stone, but as he looked closer, he saw they were intricate and deliberate. They were swirling, spiraling lines that branched out like veins. They covered every surface of the chamber, pulsing faintly in the beam of his light. They looked less like something carved into the rock and more like something that had grown there. The most disturbing discovery was the sound. When he stood perfectly still and held his breath, he could hear it. It was a very low, rhythmic thrumming noise. It was not a sound he could place. It was more of a feeling, a vibration that he felt in the soles of his feet and in the bones of his chest. It was slow and steady, like a giant sleeping heartbeat. Thump, 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 thump. The sound seemed to come from the walls themselves, from the very rock that surrounded him. Morai Han, the practical man of science and numbers, felt a cold knot of fear tighten in his stomach. This was no ordinary cave. Morai pushed his fear down and decided to explore a bit further. He followed a narrow passage that led from the main chamber deeper into the mountain. The rhythmic thumping grew stronger here. The air became warmer, and the strange organic smell intensified. The passage twisted and turned, and the smooth, veined walls seemed to press in on him. He felt a growing sense of unease, a primal instinct that screamed at him to turn back. It felt as if he was not walking through a cave made of rock, but through the throat of some immense living creature. The soft floor squished under his boots, and he imagined he was walking on flesh. He came to a second chamber, this one larger than the first. In the center of the room, something hung from the ceiling. He pointed his flashlight at it. It was a large, pod-like shape, about the size of a man. It was made of the same dark, veined material as the walls, and it pulsed slowly in time with the thumping sound that filled the cave. Several thick, root-like tendrils connected it to the ceiling. It looked like a grotesque fruit hanging in the darkness. As his light touched it, the pod seemed to contract slightly, and the thumping sound grew a little faster. Morai felt his own heart begin to race in response. Suddenly, the flashlight in his hand began to flicker. The bright, steady beam faltered, casting jumping shadows across the chamber. He shook it, but the light only grew dimmer, turning a weak, sickly yellow. Panic seized him. The thought of being left in this place in total darkness was terrifying. The thumping sound seemed to be getting louder, filling his head. He imagined the walls closing in, the soft floor swallowing him up. He had seen enough. He turned and scrambled back the way he came, his boots slipping on the spongy ground. He didn't look back at the pulsing pod in the center of the room. He burst out of the cave entrance, gasping for the fresh, clean air of the forest. He fell to his knees on the muddy ground, his heart hammering against his ribs. The sunlight, even on a cloudy day, felt blindingly bright after the absolute blackness of the cave. He looked at his hands. They were covered in a thin, sticky film from touching the walls. The rhythmic thumping was gone, but he could still feel the echo of it in his bones. Morai Han was no longer a man who dismissed local folklore. He had been inside the mountain, and he had found something that was not rock and was not natural. He knew, with a certainty that chilled him to his soul, that he had been inside something that was alive. Shaken and pale, Morai Han packed up his camp in a hurry. He left his surveying equipment where it stood and practically ran out of Whitmer's Gap. He drove his truck down the winding dirt roads until he reached the small cluster of houses that made up the nearest community. He stopped at the first house he saw, a small, well-kept cabin with a porch swing and a garden out front. An old man with a long white beard and deeply wrinkled skin was sitting on the porch, carving a piece of wood. This was Jeremiah Blackthorne, a man whose family had lived in these mountains for 200 years. He was known as someone who knew the old ways and the old stories. Morai, still breathing heavily, stumbled onto the porch and told Jeremiah what he had found. He described the landslide, the hidden entrance, the smooth walls, the soft floor, and the terrible rhythmic beating sound. He told him about the large pulsing pod hanging from the ceiling in the dark. As Morai spoke, Jeremiah's face grew grim. He stopped his carving and set the wood down. He did not look surprised. He looked weary, as if he were hearing a story he had known and feared his whole life. He listened patiently until Morai was finished, his eyes never leaving the young surveyor's face. When Morai finished his frantic tale, he asked Jeremiah to gather some men and go back with him. He said they had to investigate, to see what was in there. But Jeremiah Blackthorne shook his head slowly. "No," he said, his voice low and firm. "Some doors are best left shut. Some things are best left buried." He told Morai that the old stories weren't just stories. He said his grandfather used to talk about the ground in the gap being unwell. He said that the mountains sometimes dreamed, and it was not a good thing to be near it when it did. He warned Morai that what he had found was not meant for men to see. Jeremiah refused to go near the cave. He also warned Morai not to speak of it to the other families in the hollow. He said it would only bring fear and trouble. "You woke something up, son," Jeremiah said, his voice barely a whisper. "The best thing to do now is leave it be. Go home. Forget what you saw. The mountain was here long before us, and it will be here long after we're gone. We don't disturb its sleep." Morai Han, who had arrived in the mountains full of confidence and logic, found himself believing the old man. The fear he had felt in the cave was still fresh. He did not argue. He got back in his truck and left the mountains that very day. Morai Han never came back. The timber company he worked for eventually sent another team, but they were told to stay clear of Whitmer's Gap, citing unstable ground. The official report mentioned only the landslide. There was no mention of a cave, but Morai's frantic story had spread, whispered from one person to the next. Though Jeremiah had warned against it, fear is a hard thing to keep quiet. The people of the surrounding hollows knew something had happened. They knew the surveyor had found something that had terrified him, something that had made old Jeremiah Blackthorne's face turn ashen. The story of the breathing cave became the newest and most terrifying tale in the region. The discovery changed the hollow. Before, Whitmer's Gap had been a place of vague unease and old, half-forgotten ghost stories. Now it was a place of known and tangible terror. The landslide had not just opened a cave, it had opened a wound in the community's sense of safety. People who lived nearby grew more watchful, more fearful. Parents told their children to never, under any circumstances, go near the gap. Hunters who had once passed through its woods now took the long way around, adding miles to their journeys to avoid the place. They said the air there felt different now, colder and more hostile. Things began to happen. Livestock owned by families living on the ridges nearest to the gap started disappearing more frequently. A farmer would go out in the morning to find a gate broken and a prize hog gone, with no tracks leading away from the pen. People started hearing strange noises at night, carried on the wind from the direction of the gap. It was not the familiar sound of animals or the wind in the trees. It was a low, resonant humming that seemed to make the windows rattle in their frames. Some swore they saw a faint, pulsing light glowing deep within the woods on moonless nights. The community drew further into itself. The fear was like a constant, low-grade fever. People stopped visiting their neighbors as much after dark. The laughter and music that once filled the evenings became rarer. A quiet, watchful suspicion took its place. The hollow was no longer just haunted by the ghosts of the Whitmer family. It was now watched over by the living, breathing mystery buried in the heart of the mountain. The landslide had uncovered something, and in doing so, it had cast a long, dark shadow over the lives of everyone who lived in its reach. A shadow that would not go away. Today is January 14th, 2026. Over 70 years have passed since Marai Han stumbled out of that dark cave. Most of the people who remember that time are gone now. Jeremiah Blackthorne passed away many years ago, taking much of the old knowledge with him. The story of the surveyor and the living cave has faded, becoming just another layer in the deep history of the mountains. It is a tale told by grandparents to frighten their grandchildren. A story that feels more like a legend than a memory. Most young people who hear it don't believe it was ever real. But the fear, in a way, remains. The entrance to the cave is gone. Over the decades, nature has reclaimed the scar left by the landslide. Trees and bushes have grown over the spot, and layers of soil and fallen leaves have hidden the opening once more. It is buried again, just as Jeremiah Blackthorne said it should be. There is no mark on any map that shows where it is. No one has gone looking for it. The people who live in the area, the descendants of those who heard Marai Han's story firsthand, have an unspoken agreement to leave that part of the mountain alone. It is a silent pact born of generational fear. Yet, some things haven't changed. Whitmer's Gap is still empty. No one has ever tried to build a home there again. The land remains wild and untouched. Hikers and tourists who sometimes wander into the area are often gently warned away by locals with vague excuses about dangerous wildlife or unstable terrain. The people who live on the edges of the gap are still quiet and watchful. They still report strange things from time to time. An odd humming sound on still nights, or the feeling of being watched from the deep woods. The place still has a reputation. It is a wound on the landscape that has scarred over, but never truly healed. The mystery of what lies inside that hill in Whitmer's Gap remains unsolved. Was it some strange, undocumented life form? A bizarre geological anomaly? Or was it, as Jeremiah Blackthorne believed, the mountain itself, dreaming in its deep, ancient sleep? No one knows for sure. And perhaps no one ever will. The story serves as a stark reminder, a cautionary tale whispered by the wind in the Appalachian trees. It says that there are secrets buried in the old places of the world, secrets that are not meant for human eyes. And sometimes, the most terrifying thing of all is the mystery that is left unanswered.